The longest border in the world sits between two countries, one of which invaded the other twice, and still never managed to keep it. That country is the United States, which raises a question that sounds almost too obvious to ask. If manifest destiny was real, if the appetite was there, if Canada was right there, why didn't the US just take it? Fun fact, they tried. And the answer to why it never worked is considerably more embarrassing than most Americans would like to admit. So, to understand why the US never annexed Canada, you have to go back to the moments when it actually tried, and watch those attempts fall apart in real time. The first attempt came in 1775, before the United States was even officially a country. The Continental Congress sent an army north into Quebec on the theory that French Canadians, having recently been conquered by Britain themselves, would obviously want to join the revolution. It was a reasonable assumption. It was also completely wrong. The French Catholic population had no particular interest in being liberated by Protestant Anglo-Americans, and the invasion collapsed in the snow outside Quebec City. The Canadians, it turns out, had not been waiting to be rescued. Then came 1812, the second attempt, and the more ambitious one. The US invaded Canada explicitly, burned the capital of Upper Canada at York, and expected a quick land grab. The logic made sense on paper. Britain was tied up fighting Napoleon in Europe and couldn't possibly defend a distant colony. What actually happened was that the British moved troops anyway, the Canadians fought back harder than expected, and a British force walked into Washington and burned the White House in return. The country that had built its identity around removing European empires from the Western Hemisphere had just had its capital torched by one of them. And that is the structural point the whole question rests on. Britain was not Spain. Spain was a declining empire with overstretched supply lines and a navy that had already lost to Britain once. Britain was the dominant naval power on Earth, capable of projecting force across an ocean faster than most people expected. Annexing Canada didn't mean picking a fight with a neighbor. It meant picking a fight with that. After 1815, both sides quietly agreed to stop trying, which immediately raises the next question. What did the US do instead? The US tried to take Canada twice and got its own capital burned for the trouble. So, honestly, would you have tried a third time? Drop your answer in the comments below, because what the US did next was arguably smarter than any invasion. After 1815, both sides quietly agreed to stop trying, and what the US did instead was, arguably, considerably more elegant than a third invasion. The Bagot Agreement of 1817 demilitarized the Great Lakes. No warships, no fortifications, no expensive naval arms race along a border that stretched for thousands of miles. Then, the Oregon Treaty of 1846 settled the western boundary at the 49th parallel without a single shot fired. The US got the Pacific Northwest it had been eyeing for decades. It got it through a negotiated letter, not a military campaign. Manifest destiny, it turns out, had a budget. But here is where the domestic politics become just as important as the military math. Even if Britain had somehow stepped aside and handed Canada over, annexing it would have handed Washington an enormous problem it had no clean solution to. Quebec was French, Catholic, and deeply uninterested in becoming American. The loyalist Anglophone population in Ontario had literally fled the United States after the Revolution because they preferred British rule. Absorbing either group into the American political coalition of the 19th century was a logistical headache that no president particularly wanted to inherit. There was one brief, almost comedic attempt to force the issue. In the 1860s, Irish-American groups called the Fenians launched a series of raids across the Canadian border, hoping to seize territory and ransom it back to Britain in exchange for Irish independence. It did not work. It alarmed the Canadians, irritated the British, and mostly embarrassed the U.S. government, which eventually had to shut the whole thing down. Canada, for its part, used the experience as a rallying argument for Confederation in 1867, so the Fenians accidentally helped build the country they were trying to destabilize. By the late 19th century, the U.S. had quietly achieved everything annexation was supposed to deliver. American capital was flowing into Canadian railways, mines, and factories. Trade moved freely across the border. The two economies were becoming deeply intertwined without Washington having to govern a single extra province or maintain a garrison against British retaliation. The U.S. didn't annex Canada for the same reason you don't buy a restaurant you already eat at for free. The border stayed because for America, it was simply the cheaper option. And cheaper, as it turned out, won every time. The answer to this question changes everything. Subscribe and don't miss what's next on screen.